to all our listeners. We're back and we have Lorwyn, Connie Nagel sitting around the table with us, and of course the lovely David P. Curtis. These guys have been off painting for the last couple of weeks, so and if you saw the one of the episodes that we posted with a picture of them painting with their friend Tommy Heinsohn, did you guys have a good trip? Did we get lots of good work?
Yes, actually.
Yeah, that's great. And
Tommy kept us in line.
I'm sure he did. And this work is going to be in an exhibition at a location to be disclosed in Kittery Point on September 29th, which I believe is a Saturday. So we'll be promoting that a little more in the future, so stay tuned. If you would like to see some of this work, we'll tell you how you can get an invitation. So without further ado, because I know that the kids here are anxious to get out and paint today, let's get right into our topic of the day: practice, practice, practice. And we all know the old adage that practice makes perfect, or as Vince Lombardi said, practice does not make perfect, only perfect practice makes perfect. Now, I don't know whether there's such a thing as such perfection that you get a perfect painting at the end of it. We'll be asking Connie and David whether after all these years of practicing the art of plein air painting, whether they've ever got the perfect painting. But before we get to that, I want Connie made a remark earlier on, and I just wanted to have a talk about this a little bit. Connie, and I might be paraphrasing here, but you were talking about that when you go out, you've been going out not specifically to make pictures or paintings, but you've been going out and looking for scenes, but you're not trying to render the scene, but looking at how you can interpret it as an interesting design.
Right.
So could you talk a little more about that thought process?
So this has actually been happening for me throughout the summer. It's probably started in the spring. Is that because of my readings and understanding of the design, the concept of design in plein air painting, I've been going out. And when I decide on a scene in front of me, I decide on it because of certain aspects, certain elements in the scene. And then throughout the time that I'm painting, I'm constantly looking at the entire scene, not to render it per se, which is to say, oh, I did really like that tree there with the stone wall. Instead, I might say tree and stone wall are in my piece, but there's all sorts of other things that, so it's sort of like I take a panoramic view constantly. I'm looking at, wow, this bird over here could be nice in the scene. I could have this, I could have some kind of cloud formation that I see that's maybe toward the north, or, you know, it's outside of my scene at the time, but I put it into the composition. So in what I'm saying is that I'm practicing design and color.
Mm-hmm. And that's probably a good way to do it. If you're just going out to look for a perfect location and then just trying to paint it, as you say, per se, are you losing something? Are you losing something of the artistic creativity that you can bring to a scene?
Well, one of the things, too, that I was thinking about in terms of practicing, like opening up to what is going on in front of the scene to complement your piece, is it's more forgiving, I think, to the artist.
Yeah.
Like, the artist is not with this onus of, oh, I must get that scene correct. Mm-hmm. And I think when I first started plein air painting, I used to think about the time of day and the lighting effect and all this kind of stuff and trying to capture that. And it's good to try to capture that, but I think it's more exciting and maybe, as I said before, forgiving to the artist to try to, you know, put together a good composition, a good design.
Okay.
And I think a good design happens regardless of what the lighting, how much the weather has changed, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. David, you've had an artistic license for many, many years now. Because having grown up in an artistic family, I'm sure you were aware of what your father was doing. I'm sure he gave you some good advice when you were a youngster, watching at his knee.
He told me to date you.
Well, I told you, smart man, very smart man. But when you go out painting, what is it that you're looking for? I know you've been doing, since you were ill, you got back into painting by doing a lot of these 12/16s, whereas before you were doing these big giant canvases. Is the fact that you're going out and just trying to get that quick look, that alla prima look, has that helped you in composing the painting?
Well, it's nice that you mentioned composition. I just wanted to reiterate what Connie was saying, follow up on that. And the idea that, well, since Connie and I have sort of created this Sight and Insight partnership, I think we've also been doing a lot of critiquing of each other's works. And Connie's able to look at one of my pieces and find the thing that's most wrong in the painting. So we've been spending probably the last, and this sort of goes hand in hand with my idea of doing little sketches, practicing little sketches, trying to capture the moment. As Monet said, you got to paint a 20-minute period of time. But I really feel that these 12/16 and practicing now, I'm in my second year of just trying to do one per. I've gotten better. I've gotten better at the design, and I think that's an important part of this. So if I go out and I'm consciously thinking in the back of my head, sort of an agreement Connie and I had that we would do this practice, but we'd be practicing things like the elements of design. What makes a good design? What makes an interesting design? I did a demonstration for the class recently in which I tried to show that a straight line and a curved line placed in the right place on your canvas can make an interesting painting. Just a one straight line and a curve around the base of that straight line. And I painted a tree sitting in a meadow. And it was the color of the field that went around the base of the tree to make the curve next to the straight line. They're opposites. So we've been deliberately practicing. I suppose I've been doing this more than thinking about the results of a painting, because it took all the pressure off me to say it's a sketch. Well, this is just a sketch. It's just a practice. It's not something I'm going to put in a frame and enter it into an annual major competition. It's just to go out and practice. And since I've been practicing, I think Connie's just said that, since she's been practicing, I see a progress. I see actual progress, and not just trying to repair the painting for an exhibition, but trying to go out and find something new, discover new things through this practicing. I believe one of the great pianists of all times, Horowitz, was always into doing the scales, practicing. And it was that practice that made it. And if it's Vince Lombardi, I don't remember seeing any great paintings by Vince Lombardi, but he's probably right.
Yeah,
you have to practice with something, some purpose.
I think he goes back to the Renaissance.
Oh, is
I suppose when you think about something like Tom Heinsohn, I know I've seen a number of his paintings, and he's very good. And somehow you don't expect somebody that's as big as Tom to be able to sit down there and create a painting with sort of these, I hate to say, delicate nuances in his painting, because he's such a big guy, but he does have a great touch with the brush. But as a basketball player, he must have practiced constantly, because it's only by working out either on your own or shooting baskets or working with your teammates that you ever get anywhere. So practice is very important, no matter what profession you're in.
And actually, I think he uses 20-foot brushes.
20-foot brush probably needed. He could wield a 20-foot brush when you think about it.
Now, speaking of Tommy, also, I mean, his ears might be burning. Is that he practices sketching. So he sketches. It's not my skill or practice, but he is always sketching prior to painting.
Yeah.
And again, that's something that somebody might want to do, and might want to take up as a practice.
Yeah.
I think I was going to mention too, another practice that I'm been doing is color spotting, and it's exciting. I think when we're talking about this whole on this podcast about practice, one of the things that comes to my mind when I hear that term practice, I always think, ugh, that it's a real like onus that you have to practice over and over again. But the way I'd like to approach this is that it's a matter of discovery. That because of the two practices that I'm talking about that I'm currently doing in plein air painting are exciting for me, and the second one is color spotting, and it is after I've got my scene in front of me, I'm already set up, I'm painting away, I put down the colors, both light and dark. So I'm not going with a prescription of I must get my darks in, then I layer it with something else, then I do my sky, and I slowly go down. I'm not doing that. I'm going all over the canvas with both the lightest light, the mid light, but the color notes. And for me, it's sort of like a little zippity doo dah, and I think that you could be dancing around your easel, pretty soon. So practice can become an exciting event.
Yeah, I think perhaps a lot of students think that practice. Who wants to practice? Everybody wants to go out there and get the beautiful painting that you can put in a nice gold frame and sell it and then move on to the next one. Realise that there's a lot of work that goes into it. And so I know John Singer Sargent said you can't do sketches enough. You've got to sketch everything and keep your curiosity fresh. But when it comes to teaching students, do you think that they're more concerned with not going out and say sketching trees, a whole bunch of trees to practice that they don't see practice as a step towards creating a fabulous painting? They're too busy. Do they think it's formulaic? It's like practicing the flute, Connie. I know that you were working on that, and you have to practice. You have to make sure your fingers are manipulative, and you have to know the scales and the notes. And it's a lot of hard work, I should think, is practice. So when you're talking about practice for an artist, I would think that that's a slightly different thing. You could go out and just practice sketching, and you're still going to get a good painting at the end of it, hopefully.
No, I think you're right. I think sometimes the student is trying to complete the whole thing.
Yeah.
But that's part of it too. I mean, that is true. That there's nothing wrong with whatever somebody beginning doing. If I said practice to them and they're saying, no, I don't want to practice, I want to do a complete piece because I want to get it in a show, I would understand that as well. I mean, that's part of what we're trying to do. I think the practice, like I mentioned, could take the pressure off you a little bit. So you don't have to do a finished painting. You don't have to. I'm painting on a canvas board. It's not precious. It's not a piece of Belgium linen that is got to be held and make sure I make every brush stroke count. I can sort of let go a little bit and see what, and as Connie said, experiment a little bit. Try new things, new ways. I'm hoping that by doing these sketches that I'm going to come out at the other end through all this practicing of sketching, that I'll have a better understanding of how to do a better landscape.
Yeah, it's I had a great question to ask you just then, and it suddenly just fell off into a big black hole. So I don't know. So
I was going to also mention something about that practice leads to more self-control, like.
Like a doctor?
Yeah.
A surgeon?
Well, sort of. I mean, I would hope that they have control, the surgeons. But when I say control, I think that the more you practice, like color spotting, let's say, that I was just talking about, the more you're apt to have some control over. You look out there and say, wow, that's a rich, deep blue water that I see. And I begin to understand how to make that, I may, because I've been practicing it. I've been practicing a color spotting for water, maybe in prior practices, and so it leads to a sense of competence, I believe.
Yeah.
Competence or confidence?
Well, both. That was a little merge.
Yeah.
No, I think that's very true. I think the practicing is. I think it's more important than finishing. I mean, I would imagine the really nuts and bolts of this would be the portrait artist, who gets a commission to do a great portrait of the husband or wife or the daughter or the child.
And the dog.
And of course, the parents are the first ones to critique it. They don't know anything about painting or art, but they know everything about the subject matter. And so I think that must be very frustrating for the artist to be on that threshold of selling the painting, you might say, and then waiting for the results of the people that they have to like it. And you can get comments like, well, my daughter would never have a hair out of place like that, or I remember seeing a portrait gentleman did, Robert Cormier, I think, painted a portrait of a young girl, and he decided to put a streak in her hair, a colored streak, and this was probably in the 90s when that sort of thing was hip or in. And it was I think the girl was blonde and she had one blue streak in her hair, and that made the portrait really great. And he was smart enough to make sure that the girl did put that piece of dye in her hair in that one place, and organized it. And then the parents, as soon as they saw, oh, that's just like her, So of course it was successful. But I think that when it's all on the line for you when you're painting, that's very tough. I enjoy the life of a landscape painter. I can paint what I want.
Yeah.
And if I feel it's up to my, likings, find a frame for it and put it in a show. But I think the idea behind practice is to get away from that pressure that you're putting on yourself and go out and enjoy painting for a time.
Yeah, I think
agree.
that's right. I've just remembered what the question was. Something about it. You were doing these 12/16s, and I know you've been going out and painting up a storm recently, and you come home and you show these, and I think, wow, those are really good, and they're done, in a brief time. And as you say, they're sketches, so you're taking away the pressure of you've got to come back with a completed painting that's going to be good enough to frame and put in a gallery. But the problem I notice is that you come back and you think, yeah, well, I don't like this bit, or I don't like that, or I should have moved this, and you take those sketches out again and paint over them, which is, I know you say it's good to paint over another painting because it builds up the surface and it's easier to paint on. My problem is that sometimes you paint over the ones that I really like, and so it's very subjective. You look at something and it's something about it bothers you. You don't feel that it's up to your standard, and therefore you paint over it. So do you think that by going over these, do you really lose? You lose that original sketch, but you might go out and you might think, well, I could do that, but it needs a bit to the right or a bit to the left or a bit top and bottom, and you can change it, or you can even take those original sketches and blow them up into a larger piece.
Yeah, I think it's flexibility.
Yeah. Mr. Flex.
I think you also brought up a point, Judy, about critiquing, because I'm thinking about when we do bring our practice sketches in, it's real important to critique.
Yes.
To critique each other's paintings, as well as learn to critique your own paintings. Mm-hmm. And that's, again, a practice that I've been developing a lot lately, is sitting around. I do it in the morning, actually. I put the painting up in my living room and sit with a cup of coffee, and I look at it for a while, and I'll say, in fact, there was a recent one that I painted with Tommy and David in Newcastle, and I realized that it had this big sort of this green triangle in the middle of the piece. And I thought, whoa, that doesn't work in this piece. But I wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't relaxed, put the painting in front of me, and sat with a cup of coffee and just take a gander at what I'm doing, and in a relaxed manner, in a way that's not, I got to get this thing together, I got to pull it together. I'm not thinking that way.
Self-critical,
Or super critical.
Or,
Exactly. It's just like, what works in this? What doesn't work in this? So I think those questions are really important and part of the practice motif.
Yeah.
And just as a test, Connie and I have, if she goes out, paints, and wants a critique, she'll mail it to me, and I do the same. And I think one of the most recent ones, I had looked at the piece before I sent an image off to Connie, and I looked at, and I found mistake 1, 2, and 3, obvious mistakes in that order that had to be corrected in the piece. And so when I got the letter back from Connie with the critique, there they were, 1, 2, 3. It's uncanny.
Great minds think alike.
And I'm always in the state of, I can't believe that somebody else is thinking exactly this visual. So I do think there's a lot of truth in this idea of critiquing. And I think the fresh, my teacher used to call it the fresh guy with a fresh eye. Just don't be too fresh, and but it is that fresh eye that you're looking for. And sometimes I think when my dad gave me a lot of critiques, it was something I absorbed and took in, and then would go back out and when I painted a new painting to experiment with what he would just made the comments on, to try it with the new piece. And therefore I think that's what's important is for instance, the other thing that dawns on me about practice is that's how I got started. I think I told this story the last time that I decided I wanted to be a landscape painter, not a studio painter. And when I realized after my first year of efforts that they were pretty missing of a lot of parts that I felt would be important to nature, so I went out and practiced. And we are doing a workshop. Practicing the elements of nature is very important, whether it's trees or rocks or the ocean. We can always practice, how do you get the sheen on water? How do you get the surface quality? I always admired still lifes because brass looks like brass, copper looks like copper,
they get the texture.
Porcelain, they get the feeling of the texture in all the items. And I think that's a great challenge to a landscape painter is how do you make water look like it's shiny, like reflective and shiny? How do you get sand to look like it's, ancient glass or whatever it is, How do you do these things? And I think those are things that if you go out and you want to practice those things rather than setting up for an official painting, portrait painting of nature, I think it's invaluable. Is that right? Invaluable. What the results are. And to be honest with you, some of the sketches that I've been doing over the past 10 years, 2 years, have been sold, and people like them. So I've been framing them and selling the sketches.
They do. They have a nice fresh look. Isn't that what alla prima is? It's a sketch that is done in a certain time and left alone. That you're not fiddling with it in the studio or anything like that. And I do think that when you bring them in, they do have that real fresh look to them. They were done. They're not laboured over. The detail is not so much that it's been picked apart, because sometimes you can see an artist who's done a beautiful painting, but when you look at it, you first thought that's really nice, and then you look at it and you realise it's tight. There's so much.
It's too objective.
Yeah, there's so much photorealism in it, or they've sucked all the life out of it.
Yes, that's very true. Connie recently did a piece that she sent to me for a critique, And it was really, you talk about practicing, and this is a very unusual subject matter. And we were out painting together, 3 of us out painting together, and this near Portsmouth, the Piscataway River, and in comes this enormous tanker. Bright red tanker with 3 tugboats pushing, pulling, whatever. The big ship was pulling it. Anyway, it was enormous, and it just overtook everything. And Connie was all excited, but the boat just moved so fast. The next day, you did a little sketch of remembering what that looked like. But it was the design. It was the design of it that made it. I mean, when I looked at it, I saw a pleasing design. Didn't see the subject matter.
Yeah,
I didn't see a big ship first off, or a bridge or anything.
Are fabulous.
It's the colors and then the design. I just moved around that painting so quickly and didn't care, realizing that it was the pleasing arrangement of shapes and colors that made that painting worth looking at. And that dawned on me that that's sort of one of the things you've been working on, right?
Yeah, you mean the color spotting?
Exactly.
Yeah. But the other thing you remind me of the idea of photograph, because I did take a photograph while that was going on.
That's not allowed then.
And I think a lot of people take photographs, but I want to put a plug in for this, outdoor versus studio painting and bringing something back in and looking at the photograph or looking at the monitor of your computer and saying, well, this is what it looked like. Well, I think that what I do is that I get the feel that I had before when I was standing out there actually taking that photo. And all it does is help me to realize, okay, the tanker looked a certain way, and I can, again, pick and choose. I think because of the practice that I have been into lately about picking elements in the scene that augment the piece. That's all I'm doing when I look at a photograph too. So
it's
the
sort of a memory aid, and you're not copying the photo.
So the photograph doesn't become the sine qua non, the apex of the thing. It becomes just a tool. It's again another tool like a brush is, or my colors. And I think it helps you. I think the more that you practice outdoors, the more that you don't lean on photographs.
Yeah. Well, that's why I said that.
But I just wanted to put a plug in around
it wouldn't make any difference whether you did
Yeah.
or not. But the painting did not look, like I said, when I looked at it, I saw a design. I didn't see a picture of a boat.
Yeah.
And that's what I liked about it.
Yeah.
Actually, it was the red note and the psychology of color again played a part. I saw the red first, almost subconsciously, and then I saw these, typical of me, I saw these squares or rectangles of white that led me to the turret house of the big ship. And then it just moved right around the painting. No, it was really amazing. And that brings up a good point, because you're talking about the work that can be done in the studio. And I think, for me, I'm not a big one to use reference photos. I think the only reason for using reference photos is to try to remember the drawing.
Yes, I agree with that.
I was lucky. Again, my dad, when we were kids, my 2 older brothers and I were the people. He had to organize art shows, and of course we were the ones who could lug 60, 70, 80 paintings for him to put up an art show. Was us. But we would drive along the highway, and he would say, "Okay, there was a house half a mile back. What color was it? How many windows did it have? What color were the shutters? What features were on the front of the house, and things like that." And I thought it was just a fun game we were playing, but it trained my memory, and I realized how strong the memory is, visual memory. And I used to practice a lot of, if I went out and painted on location, when I returned, could I imagine or picture the image in which I was just at, the scene I was just doing, and could I picture? Not only could it appear back in my mind's eye, but the wind was there too. Some of those subtle elements
That's
were
true.
in the dream or hallucination or vision or whatever it is. And so I think for any painter that returns quickly and enters the studio, I think Hibbert did this for that reason, that it was fresh in his memory, to continue working on the piece even though he couldn't do it outdoors, and do some things to it that would not only improve the composition, which enables you to concentrate more on the painting itself, but it brings in your imagination, it brings in your memory skills. But basically, it boils down to what we've been talking about, that design and color are probably simultaneously as important as each other in a painting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's all very interesting, and we're coming to a close here, but there is just one comment I would like to throw out to you. As Malcolm Gladwell said, success has to do with deliberate practice. Practice must be focused, determined, and in an environment where there's feedback. So I suppose you could put that into terms of a workshop, so that students are focusing on things for 3 days, 5 days, and they're getting plenty of practice and sketching in, and you've got to be focused and determined during that time. But there's also feedback in that environment, not only from the instructors, but also from other students in the class.
Right.
And I know that you're going to be doing a workshop up in Maine, David, and that the two of you are doing a Sight and Insight workshop, October Skies, obviously in October.
The 10th.
The 10th, okay, yes.
10th, 11th, and 12th.
So that
3-day workshop, and it's just the element of, we call it aerial perspective, but it's basically designing your skies and clouds, which we think is one of the most important elements of finding nature's elements to apply to a landscape.
Yeah.
I think if you can do, I think if Fitzhugh one of the great Gloucester painters,
Fitzhenry Lane.
Henry Lane, I always like Hugh.
I know, I think Hugh.
Because of color, right? Hue, color. And but it's 1/3 to 2/3 proportion in most of his landscapes. 1/3 land, 2/3 sky. And I think that that's very true, that skies are probably the most important. And I think between Connie's insight into capturing a feeling that they see in the sky and something very dramatic, overstating it a little bit. Connie's very good at this, and I'll be there to help with the modeling of clouds, and we have a little bit of a speed up technique to help people if they want to try it, to help them establish a sky design.
Yeah, well, that sounds great, and I know your critiques have always been fabulous. Maybe you should be offering online critiques to people as well. Maybe we could think about that for the future.
That's a good idea.
However, before we close up shop here and get going with the rest of the day, I hope that absence made the heart grow fonder, and that you missed us during the last 2 weeks. And if you did, and if you realise how important it is to have our conversation in your lives, could we ask you to subscribe to the podcast? And if you can rate it and review it on iTunes, that would be great too. Let's get the word out there to all those art lovers, because art is so important, especially today. There's a lot of angst out there, but I think art is a great leveler, and we could do with some of those moments in our lives where we could just sit and look at nature, or look at an artist's impression of nature and just lose ourselves in that. And don't forget, practice makes perfect, and a painting a day keeps the doctor away. So thanks for listening. See you next week. Have a great one.